what happens when your land disappears? The place you live on, where your house resides, where your kids play, what happens if all of that is gone? What happens to you? What happens to your land? What happens to your country? What happens to your nation? It's a question that here in Canada, we haven't really had to answer too much. Certain places are more vulnerable than others. However, or as a country, we're going to be here for a long time. But there are other nations out there, small island nations, who are facing a very urgent need to answer these questions of what happens to their nation if sea level rise and storm surges takes over their land. Do they become a nation, or do they still become a small island state? We're going to find out all these questions and what happens and what people are talking about and where that progress is being made and where it's not being made on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, first of all, I just want to say Happy Canada Day and Happy Independence Day to the Canadians as well as my American friends. It's a holiday here. I am actually coming back from a cottage or on my way back from a cottage or maybe thinking of coming back from a cottage. At this point, when you're listening to this on Monday, July 4th, I celebrated Canada Day with some friends that we'd go away to their cottage every year with the families. And, it's just a great time to just kind of spend with people and spend with families. Obviously, every nation has their abilities to improve in the way they manage their people. But it's also a nice time to just celebrate because it is a holiday and to celebrate our country because we definitely live in good times right now, mostly, from a Canadian perspective anyway. And we need to do a lot of, improvement, but we are in a decent place as a country, and I'm very thankful for that. Not a lot of countries are in a good place. There's war-torn areas, there's rebellions, there's indoctrinations, there's dictatorship, and all that crazy political stuff that can really upheave countries and people and sort of the way they live their lives and their ability to be free and their ability to do and live the way they want. One thing that's also impacting, a lot of small island nations is sea level rise. And it's something that we don't talk a lot about. I feel as though a lot of people, when they hear sea level rise and they're not necessarily involved in ocean conservation or involved in climate change or just know a lot about it, when somebody says sea level rise, they'll be like, well, what does it matter if the sea across the world, across the globe, raises 1 meter? Or, what happens if that increases? It's not going to be a big deal to us, for a lot of the people that I speak to. And I hear that a lot. And I'm just like, what about other nations? What about other nations where their sea level rise, the highest point is 2 meters, right? Or the highest point is a meter and a half. They're struggling right now. They may not be struggling, right now in terms of like their land could be safe right now. There have been nations that had to move because of sea level rise, because of constant flooding due to storm surges, because of a lack of sort of coastal protection that they weren't able to put in for a number of different reasons. They had to move, and it's a problem. Right? When imagine you've been on an island or you've been in one area for thousands of years, and then all of a sudden, the ocean is just like, nope, we're going to take care of this for you. And it's not even your fault. It's not even your nation's fault, right? It's a lot of it is due to climate change, which is is caused by a lot of the developed countries around the world, including Canada, including the U.S., China, India. Right, a lot of the developed countries out there that are pumping greenhouse gases into the air like it's nobody's business. And it's affecting a lot of other people. And around a lot of other people around the world. And we don't see that. We don't see that on a daily basis. We don't hear from them on a regular basis because of a lot of just just suppression of the voices. Obviously, that's not fair, right? And I feel like when I talk about how to protect the ocean, when I talk about the actions you can take to live for a better ocean, it's not just the ocean that surrounds your country or that surrounds you. It's the ocean that surrounds everybody. We need to think of as a collective and of a human species. There are people that live in all parts around the world, and some of those people are struggling right now. They're struggling to be like, hey, what happens if we lose our land? What happens to the state of us? What happens to our nation if we lose our land? A lot of these small island states, as an example, the small island state of Tuvalu, which is in the Pacific. It is an atoll, and it is. There's a satellite image on the link that I'm going to provide in where I got this article from The Guardian, and you look at the land pieces, and it's not very big. It's a view. There's a satellite view of Funafuti. It's an atoll which is on which the capital of the island nation of Tuvalu is located, and it's very narrow, and it's there's not a lot of land already, and so but they've had a nation there that's been there for hundreds of years, and they're in trouble if they constantly see their coastline being eaten away. Right, it's a huge struggle, and you just kind of have to think of like what constitutes a nation. Where is that definition? We all think, hey, we have these definitions here. I know Canada is a nation. I know it's a sovereign country. We have that, but what actually constitutes an actual nation? And I think, for a lot of these states, they're looking at their definition. They're saying, wait a minute, I need to where do we go from here if we don't have a nation? Right? What happens to us? Some of the questions that are being asked here in this article. It was at a conference on this topic in Fiji. The Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, Mark Brown, framed this debate in a series of existential questions. He says, and I quote, "As our shorelines are eaten away by sea level rise, what will become of our sovereignty of our lands, our titles, our homes? What will become of our fundamental rights and freedoms guaranteed by our constitutions and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? How can we realize our shared vision when our very status as states is being questioned? How can we fulfill our responsibility to our peoples in their homes if their homes and livelihoods are taken away from them? These questions are difficult but real. They require solutions." Right? These are general questions that people have. It's a very real thing that people are going through. And I hate to see that people have to go through this, right? And here I am in Canada, surrounded by the Great Lakes, where I can go about my business during the day, and I'm okay. I'll be okay. But a lot of other people are not. They have these worries about sort of what are they going to do? There's very different questions, that can cause a lot of anxiety within a people. And this is why for one of the definitions of statehood under international law was reflected in the Montevideo Convention. And here's the 4 criteria: a physical territory, population, government, and the capacity to enter into relations with other countries. Right? So imagine that. So Simon Coffey, I think I'm pronouncing that properly, the foreign minister of Tuvalu, said here, he says, if we were to take that definition, Tuvalu could possibly lose its status as a state if we lose our physical territory or we are forced to relocate to a different location. So we are just imagining the worst case scenario. If it does come to that, we would want the world to continue to recognize our statehood as being permanent. And so what happens if that happens? If they lose their land because it's constantly being flooded? What happens to their nation? What happens to their statehood? According to the definition under the international law, they lose that land. They lose that statehood. But they want to be recognized. So it's going to require looking at this international law and the definition to say, are we going to allow nations to keep their statehood? Are we going to allow nations to keep their identity? Or are they just going to have to move and formulate, and sort of adapt to another statehood? That's a huge problem. That's going to cause a lot of conflict, in future times. And now let's talk about, the sea level rise. According to the IPCC reports that have been coming out, there was a Robert E. Kopp, an earth sciences professor at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and one of the lead authors of the IPCC report on global sea level rise, said that the country like Tuvalu, which has an average elevation of 2 meters, was unlikely to be completely flooded by the end of the 22nd century. That's good news. The possible collapse of the giant Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica could bring that forward, as it would add 1.5 meters to the ocean heights. Now, remember all these articles that I've been talking about and that you've probably been seeing where ice sheets in the Arctic and Antarctica have been melting and going into the water? Those are contributing to sea level rise, and they're giant. I think sometimes when we hear that, we're like, oh, look at that. That's amazing. We see the videos of these glaciers falling and these ice sheets falling into the water. That's contributing to sea level rise, right? Now, looking at the Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica and it actually melting and going into the water and adding 1.5 meters, that doesn't happen overnight. That could take decades. The more immediate risk, says Robert E. Kopp, was from storm surges. He says it's not just sea level rise, but when a place gets flooded multiple times a year. This view was echoed by Peter Gerard of Climate Central, who said floods would hit long before total inundation. It could become impossible to live along the coastline without protection. So it's not just the fact that sea level rise will just take over the island, in decades, right? It will be completely submerged forever. It's the constant flooding. You can't live in an area that gets constantly flooded, right? Even if people are reinforcing their coastlines with concrete flood barriers, that doesn't happen. It's only a partial defense. That'll eventually diminish. That'll eventually get taken over, just over time. It's vulnerable to tsunamis and other big flooding events, and also there's groundwater upsurges. So, you have to think of a lot of things when it comes down to flooding. It can get quite complex depending on the area. So these threats are real. These threats are happening to a lot of small island states. The conversation is not happening a lot on a main stage. And this is why when we talk about Upwell, when we talk about these conferences where they're bringing people to the stage and providing them a platform so that they can speak and talk about their experiences, their involvement in their regions of the world, their islands of the world. It's important to listen. It's important to hear their voices to find out what's happening. Because here in Canada and here in the US, we need more urgency in doing what we can to lower our impact on climate change, our contribution on climate change, right? A lot of the times I can walk out the door, I see pickup trucks, using a lot of fuel for no real reason, but other than to have a pickup truck, to be honest. Not judging, but just saying, looking at everybody with plastic water bottles and these sugar water bottles and all this kind of stuff. And it's just like, we're just going on as if everything is just happening on our own. And of course, we all have to take care of ourselves and take care of our own country. But then there's the fact of what of all the other people that were causing this to happen, right? We have an ownership to take. We have to take ownership in how we're affecting the planet. And if we don't do that, then we're not going to be in good shape for the future. It's definite. It's just going to happen. And so I want this to be a sort of an episode where you just reflect on is climate change affecting you, but how is climate change affecting the world? Right? It's not something that just is an easy fix, but it's something that we have to do more and faster. All these politicians that come out and be like, oh, we're doing this in time. We have to pressure them to do more. We have to. The planet relies on us. There are people that may not have ever met or never will meet. They rely on us. Their homes are literally being moved or submerged on a regular basis. Right? And it's not to just say take it on all yourself. We have to take it on as a global community. As something that we can't do ourselves. Can't just be one country, one nation. It has to be everybody. So think about that as, you take, you spend, and I've done it too. I've done it. We're like every day you're like, oh, I'll start tomorrow. Or, yeah, I got this water bottle that's made of plastic that was made from petroleum products and things like that. And that's okay. I needed the water. I'll get it tomorrow. I'll start again tomorrow. Nobody's perfect. I'm not judging. This is not a judgment. I do the same thing. But when I see articles like this, it makes me think of it more to say, we need to do better. We need to bring in faster policies that will work faster, that will be implemented right away, that are transparent so that people can track. That's what we need to do. That's my call to action. I would love to hear what you think we should do to help these small island nations. I'd love to hear you. This is a community. It's not just me talking out to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And maybe I'll read them out on the next episode, right? Whether you want me to say your name or not, that's fine, or on a future episode. But let's have a conversation about that. You can DM me at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean, all one word, on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. And maybe we can have a better conversation about this. But thank you again and if you want to talk about, that as your conservation journey, just click on the link. There's a Calendly link that will schedule an interview with me, and we will get you on the podcast to talk about that. So lots of conversations to happen. You just need to click those links. Anyway, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean. I love you guys. Honestly, this has been such a great time, and I'm looking forward to continuing. Just to let you know, June 22nd was my 9th year anniversary of doing this podcast, of publishing episodes on this podcast. It's been quite a journey. I look forward to more years, more than another 9 years to doing this, as I love podcasting and I love talking to all of you and hearing from all of you. But I want to thank you again for continuing to join. If you want to share this episode with somebody that you think will benefit from it, please do. That's how I grow. That's how this show grows its audience and gets more and more people involved. But thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.